On page 27b of Gemara Brochos, and we have been learning about davening Ma'ariv early. And the Gemara spoke about, number one, the fact that the halacha is unclear. If you want to follow Rabbi Yehuda, you can follow him. If you want to follow the Rabbanon, you can follow them. The final time for Mincha is either Plag HaMincha, halfway through Mincha, an hour and a quarter before sunset, or the proper time for Mincha is at sunset, or different opinions when night is, if it means 58 and a half minutes after sunset. And then comes the time for Ma'ariv. Whenever Mincha ends, that would be the time that's either a gray area, and then comes Ma'ariv, or Ma'ariv is from Plag HaMincha. So Rabbi Yehuda has this more, I would call it a lenient view. He says that once you have Plag HaMincha, halfway through Mincha, now you could daven Ma'ariv, and you would be able to, at least for the purposes of prayer, it's called night. And the Gemara talks about cases where people davened and followed Rabbi Yehuda's view, it seems like, because we have a Rav davened of Shabbos prayers on Friday afternoon, and that's one case that the Gemara gives. The Gemara earlier mentioned that Rav Matzli shal Shabbos be'erev Shabbos, and it also brings a story of other rabbis who didn't daven early, Rav Huna, the Rabbanon. So we have both options in front of us. And then the Gemara got a little sidetracked with the fact that there was a rabbi that davened together with Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, and Rav did not interrupt him. Rav did not want to take his, either didn't take the 3 steps backwards in front of him, or he didn't want to pass in front of him. And the Gemara says we have a number of things that we could learn from Rav. Again, we're just going over the Gemara from yesterday. And this is an interesting halacha about not passing in front of someone who's davening. We mentioned yesterday that there's 2 known reasons for this halacha. One is that you don't want to confuse the person who's davening. You don't want to interrupt him. And so if you walk in front of someone who's davening, it could be that you will interfere with his concentration. The other reason is because the Shechina is there. And the difference between these 2 reasons would be if you see that the person's eyes are closed, so it shouldn't make a difference if you walk back, you're not going to interrupt him or confuse him. He doesn't see anything. Or if he's all over the place as it is, he's looking all around and sees everything going on, maybe in that scenario, he doesn't care if you walk in front of him because you're not confusing him. He, as it is, he's not even concentrating on his prayers in the first place. So you could have a scenario where maybe one of the reasons would not apply, but the other reason would apply, the concept of the Shechina being there, and you don't want to separate between the Shechina and the person davening. Now, the Poskim do deal with the fact that there you do find times that someone is going to daven Shemona Esrei in the alley, in the walkway, when people are walking through the shul and you can't get in now, and people are in the middle of davening Shemona Esrei, so you're allowed to walk and cross in front of them, because that becomes, especially when it's a small shul or when people are all standing by the door, you can't get in. There might be empty seats on the other end of the shul, but how do you, people are davening and you don't want to pass in front of them, because this Gemara here tells us we're not allowed to pass in front of them. So what do you do in such a scenario? And it happens. The most common way this occurs is you have many people coming late to shul, and so they don't want to be so late and walk all the way into shul, so they start davening like right by the door, and because they want to get right into it because they're late. It's like for a mincha. The best example would be minchas. We want to start Shemona Esrei right away, and then what happens is there's too many people by the door. You want to walk in, and you're going to be passing through other people who are blocking the passageway. So there is a sefer, the Marsham Das Torah. He says that this is he compares it to another case where there's a grave that's interfering with the road and interfering with the common way. And he says similarly, if a person's davening in the walkway where people are supposed to be walking, this would be considered something that you don't have to be concerned about, and you can walk right past such a person. So there's people there is a leniency. Basically, what comes out from this is there is room to be lenient if you want to be. If you're coming late to shul and people are davening in the walkway, you would be able to pass in front of them if you want to be lenient. The other scenario is where someone is davening a nice and long Shemona Esrei and he's standing behind you. What do? Do you have to wait until he finishes the Shemona Esrei? The fact that you're going to miss Kedusha, you're missing some of the things to respond to, Amens and Baruch Hu B'Shmois, because you're still in the middle of Shemona Esrei and you can't finish your Shemona Esrei. So there is room for leniency, two separate leniencies. Number one is if the person's not directly behind you, so that's one leniency. The other leniency is if you walk diagonally, then you could diagonally. You're not really walking in front of the person. You're diagonally going, to his side. So there is room for leniency in cases where you need to where you can't wait. So these are some of the rules that come out from this Gemara. So this Gemara was talking about passing in front of someone who's davening. The other important point to mention, which we see here with Rabami and Ravasi, was that if it's outside of the 4 amos, 4 cubits, so it's more than 6 to 8 feet, then you would be allowed to pass in front of someone. Now, the Gemara got sidetracked, as I mentioned, and started talking about Reb Yirmiyah bar Abba's how he was allowed to daven behind his Rebbe because you're not supposed to. And we said a few reasons for that. Davening behind your teacher, if it's especially we're talking about someone who's your main teacher, taught you most of your wisdom. And we mentioned that the reason for that is either because it looks like you're equal to him, you're davening right behind him, or or it looks like yuhara. It looks like you're bowing down to him. And I believe I saw a third reason, that if you daven right behind your Rebbe, he's not going to be able to walk backwards. You're going to cause him possibly to have to wait for you. So it would be disrespectful because he would have to wait in order for to finish his Shemona Esrei. So I think I saw that in one of the commentaries. But in any event, Rashi and Taisus over here mention the other two reasons about the making yourself as if you're equal to your Rebbe, or not equal because you're behind him, but it's some type of a haughtiness. And that would be if you're behind him. If you're next to him, then it would be equal. If you're behind him, it's the element of haughtiness, yuhara. And the other reason that Taisus says is about, it looks like you're bowing to him. So the question was about Reb Yirmiyah bar Abba, how he did such a thing. Does anyone remember the answer? What was the answer that the Gemara gave? Why he was allowed to do this? How did he daven behind his Rebbe? Anyone remember from yesterday? guess we got to do more reviews. The Gemara answered that Reb Yirmiyah bar Abba is a not just a student, but he's a colleague. He was more like a friend. Wasn't, he did learn from him, but he was also in a similar league, and therefore he did not have the rule of being a student. He didn't have to. He was not just a student. He was also a great scholar in his own right, and therefore he was considered a colleague as well. In the Talmud, it uses the term Talmud Chaver, a student and a friend. And then the Gemara mentions that when Rav davened early, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba asked him, "Did you stop doing work?" In other words, if you daven Friday afternoon, you're accepting the Shabbos. So did you stop doing work? And the term he used was, did you stop doing work? He didn't say, did master, did the Rav stop doing work? So he didn't show him respect. So the Gemara uses that as a proof that he was considered a Talmud Chaver. He was considered a colleague and not just a student. But the Gemara gets involved in that discussion and doesn't just leave it. The Gemara says that Rav did answer, yes, I did separate from doing work. And then the Gemara asks a question on that. And the question was that Rabbi Oven said that he once davened, that Rebbe davened Shabbos davening early. And after he finished davening, he went to the bathhouse. Gemara seems to understand that he went to the bathhouse, and that was when they prohibited going to the bathhouse. That's the way the Gemara is understanding it. And yet he went even after he davened Ma'ariv. So you see that just because you daven Ma'ariv, you don't have to stop doing work. He did malacha even afterwards. He davened Ma'ariv early. Okay, followed Rabbi Yehuda. You can daven Ma'ariv early, but you have to stop doing work. And the Gemara, that's the way the Gemara is questioning that. It seems like you don't have to stop doing work. Even after he went to the bathhouse, he still taught us a chapter, taught us our teaching, our Torah study, and afterwards still didn't get dark. So Rava answers that the case was that he didn't go after the decree of going. He didn't do a malacha. He didn't do any work. He went to the bathhouse to sweat, and this was before the decree that you're not allowed. They went to the sauna, and this was before the decree. There was rules about going to the bathhouse, but we had some decrees about the bathhouse. It had something to do with the fact that people were heating up water on Shabbos. The owners of the bathhouse, or the people who leased the bathhouse, they would heat up the water on Shabbos, and they would say that the water was heated up before Shabbos. And so the rabbis made a decree: you can't bathe in a heated bathhouse. But then people started going into the sauna on Shabbos, and they would do like a sweat. They wanted to sweat, and so they would go in there. And the problem was people would go into the bathhouse as well, and then say, I'm going just to the sweat. And really, they were going to the bathhouse. So therefore, the rabbis decreed that you can't even go for the sauna. So these were decrees, and this is in Tractate Shabbos. It's not really the main point of this is not to discuss the laws of taking baths on Shabbos, but it's the applicable the point, and the reason why we're bringing it is to figure out if you're allowed to do work after you daven Ma'ariv. So the Gemara answers that this was not considered work because it was before the decree where they prohibited such a thing. Again, it was rabbinically prohibited. It's not biblically prohibited to take a bath in hot water on Shabbos, but it was rabbinically prohibited, especially because you're turning on. Well, it would be biblically prohibited if you turned on the water on Shabbos. But here we're dealing with the fact that, there are scenarios where the main usage of the bathhouse were because they were supposedly heating the water before Shabbos. And that's how it's normally done in a mikvah. But the reason why it was prohibited where people weren't following that and they were sneaking and heating it on Shabbos. But anyway, the main point is, would you be allowed to do this? Would you be allowed to, after you daven Ma'ariv, would you be allowed to do work? And the answer of the Gemara is giving is no, you're not allowed to do work, but this was not work because this was before the rabbinic decree. But the Gemara is not satisfied with that. And that's where we are up to. We're up to the word Eini. Is that so? And we're on 27b, maybe about 12 lines down, 13 lines down from the top of the page. Eini, is that so that you're not allowed to do work after you daven Ma'ariv? Is that so? V'ha Abaye sharalei l'Rav Dimi bar Livoi. Abaye permitted Rav Dimi bar Livoi l'kavruye sali. He allowed him to somehow smoke with sulfur these vessels, baskets of vessels. Now, I'm not really sure what that means. Is sulfur something that you light up? Does anyone know? Or maybe some the chemistry here. So I don't know why people would do this, but there was some concept of smoking up baskets. I don't know if it was for a good smell, to get rid of a bad smell, maybe. But they would use sulfur and smoke up these baskets, and that was not allowed on Shabbos. But this story is that Abaye permitted this rabbi to do it even after he had davened Ma'ariv. And the Gemara answers that that's not a proof, because that was a mistake. Hahu ta'usa havi, that was a mistake. And what the story was that it was a cloudy day, and he thought it got dark, and really it was like a storm, and so therefore he thought it was Shabbos was coming. Quickly davened Ma'ariv, accepted on himself Shabbos, and then he went to Abaye and he said, "I'm sorry, I didn't realize. I don't know what to do now because I davened Ma'ariv and now I see the sun is out. There was a big cloud. I thought it was night. I thought night was coming. I quickly davened, and I thought it was completely night. And now I see, we quickly lit Shabbos candles and we davened Ma'ariv, and now I see that it's really still day." So he didn't know if he was allowed. He wanted to know if he could sulfurize these vessels, and Abaye permitted him to do it. The reason he permitted him to do it, according to the Gemara's answer, is that it was a mistake. He accepted Shabbos on himself by mistake. If you accept it on yourself by mistake, it's not considered accepting Shabbos, and therefore your prayer was not considered like a Ma'ariv prayer. You didn't really accept Shabbos on yourself, and therefore you would it was all by mistake, and you can still do work. That's the Gemara's answer. But the Gemara is not satisfied with that, because the Gemara has a story where someone did daven Ma'ariv by mistake, a group of people, and they considered it a good Ma'ariv. V'to'usa mihadra. So the Gemara continues and it says, does a mistake Do you go back and you have to daven again, and it's not considered a good davening? But Avidon or Avdon mentioned Pa'amachas. There was one time Neskashu Shamayim Bavim. The heavens were all attached with clouds. There was a lot of clouds, and Kisvurin Ha'am Laimar Chashechahu. Everyone thought that it was dark. V'nichnasu lebeis hakneses. They entered the shul. V'espalalu shalmoitei Shabbos b'Shabbos. They daven Saturday night davening on Shabbos. V'nispazru ha'avim. And so the clouds scattered. V'zarcha hachama, and the sun shined afterwards. And so here you had the whole community. See, you have to understand, in those days, they didn't have clocks. So they relied on looking at the sky. And in the sky, they thought it was dark based on, they thought it was night. And sure enough, this clouds scattered and the sun came out. Ubo v'shalos Rebbe. They went and asked Rebbe. And he said, Hoyol v'hispalalu, hispalalu. He said they don't have to daven Ma'ariv again. And the davening was considered a good davening. Now, they're not allowed to do work, of course. But they're not allowed to do work. But their davening was considered acceptable. So the Gemara explains that was a mistake. Shani tzibur delay matrachinon. That a community, a congregation, is different. That we're not going to bother them to daven again, even though their tefillah was by mistake. Now, what this means is very interesting. Really, people who daven normally at nighttime, Ma'ariv, so here they daven Ma'ariv too early. It fit with Rebbe Yehuda's view, but it's not their regular view. It's not normally they daven Ma'ariv after dark. So the fact that they're davening Ma'ariv too early now, even though halachically it's permissible to daven Ma'ariv at this time, but keep in mind that this was a mistake. They normally would not daven Ma'ariv according to this view. They would not follow Rabbi Yehuda. They normally follow the other view that the Ma'ariv is at night. And this was a mistake. And they even went to their Rav and said, we made a mistake. We davened, we didn't mean to daven now. Now, in truth, it is after Plag HaMincha. So there is the view of Rabbi Yehuda, who you're allowed to follow. You are allowed to go according to. But the thing is that this was an acceptance. This was a mistaken prayer because they didn't mean to follow that view. This was all done by mistake. So because it was done by mistake, the halacha is that if a person daven Ma'ariv too early, and not according to, it's a very interesting halacha, but I'm going to read it to you in Shulchan Aruch. It's in chapter 263. If on a cloudy day, the community thought that it was dark, they lit candles and they davened Ma'ariv, Shabbos, Friday night, and afterwards the clouds scattered and the sun shined. The community doesn't have to go back and daven again, Ma'ariv, as long as they davened after Plag HaMincha, after this hour and a quarter time before night. As long as they did that, it's okay. However, if it's a yachid, if it's an individual, what happens if he's just an individual and he thought it was nighttime, and he made a mistake? I once had this happen to me. We had just changed the clocks the Saturday night before Shabbos, and we changed the clocks. And I remembered that last week, Shabbos was, let's say, I don't know, 6:30, and now we had switched the clocks, and I forgot about that we switched the clocks, and so I saw it was about 6:30. I said, I told my wife, we have to go light. It's time. It's 6:30. So she quickly lit, and then we realized that we switched the clocks, and that's why our guests hadn't arrived yet. We were sort of waiting for our guests, and we realized that the reason why they didn't come is it's really it's not so dark outside. It's really still day. We have another hour because we switched the clocks the Saturday night earlier. So I don't remember I remember calculating if it was Plag HaMincha or not, but in any event, I didn't daven Ma'ariv, so it wasn't exactly the same scenario. But here, this is an issue of davening Ma'ariv we're dealing with. So what happens if an individual did this? He went and he davened Ma'ariv, and would he go back and daven Ma'ariv again? So the Shulchan Aruch says yes. If it's a community, you don't go back and daven Ma'ariv again. But if he's an individual, he goes back and he davens Ma'ariv again. And regarding doing work, it says that they're allowed to do work because they accepted Shabbos by mistake. But some say that those that lit candles are prohibited to do work, but anyone else in the household is permissible. And some say that the candles that were lit for Shabbos, you're not allowed to touch or to add oil to them. And even if they go out, you can't touch them. So there's a discussion about doing work for those that lit candles. But regarding Ma'ariv, and this is why I say it's interesting, because the halacha is that you are allowed not only to daven Ma'ariv early, but Friday afternoon, there's even more leniency to daven Ma'ariv early because many people do that. And here we're telling you, you daven Ma'ariv early by mistake, you have to daven Ma'ariv again. You're a community? No, you don't have to. You're a congregation, a minyan? No, you don't have to daven Ma'ariv again. A congregation made a mistake, they don't have to. You're an individual, you made a mistake, you got to daven Ma'ariv again. Why do I have to daven Ma'ariv again? We davened in a kosher time. Many people do make early Shabbos. What's wrong? And the Mishnah Berurah here says, since you davened by mistake because you thought it was dark, and this would apply even during a weekday, since you normally daven Ma'ariv in its time like the rabbis, and this day you daven by mistake, you got to daven again. And in the Bir Halacha, which explains this, he talks about the fact that, what do you mean Friday afternoon? Many people daven early, even if they don't normally daven early during the week. And we know the halacha is you're allowed to follow Rabbi Yehuda's view. But he says that since you generally daven Ma'ariv like the rabbis, and you daven by mistake, therefore you would need to daven again. So that's the now he does bring a view that argues on this, And he says the only time you would need to daven again is if you davened mincha too late. You daven mincha after plaga mincha, and you davened ma'ariv before night. So you're doing a tarti desasri. Again, you're doing a contradiction. But and that's he brings that from the Oila Shabbos. But he says that the common understanding, and this is the way it seems from the Shulchan Aruch and all the commentaries, Magen Avraham, El Yerabah, Shabbos, Pri Megadim, they all don't follow this. They all don't learn it that way. They learn it as I explained it, and that is that if an individual makes a mistake and he davens ma'ariv before the normal time that he normally would daven, which is the night, which is after, when you normally daven after at the right time, you daven ma'ariv. So if a person made a mistake, then you would go and daven again later when it becomes night, because this was considered a to'us, it was considered a mistake. So what we see here is that, even if you are going to be lenient sometimes on Friday night to daven early, if a person made a mistake and davened early, it would not be an acceptable prayer unless they were with the community. Okay, well, I guess that really we don't have any time left. I guess we'll have to continue tomorrow. Sei gesund, everyone.
Rabbi, sei gesund.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Stay safe, everybody.